Signore e signori, buonasera. Welcome, bienvenue, willkommen. This event is co-organized with the Maison Française here at New York University and the Deutsches Haus. And of course, it's due to the author of the book that we are presenting, the director of the film, the very subject of the film. You're probably wondering, why on earth is this thing at Casa Italiana? One of the reasons is that Olivier Guez is also a Roman by adoption. So we have to unveil it right away, and I think there are going to be chances to talk about that. We are very proud of his adoptive choice, the city, because when you adopt it, I think it's much more important than when you where you were randomly born. And I think all of you can relate to that, right? How many of you are not from New York, originally? Not from New York. See? So we totally can relate to Olivier adopting or being adopted by Rome. And of course, we take this opportunity to talk with one of the most celebrated French authors and to talk about a film that had just come out and has not been seen in the US yet in public. So you're here for a treat and for an absolute premiere. But don't tell anybody that this is a premiere. Okay, but do tell about the film. We want to create a buzz around it before it comes to New York. And as you know, we do not do long presentations of our guests because you have them all on our website. Click on the names, you get to know everything about them. Just 2 words about Antonio Monda that you all know very well. He's a journalist, author, professor of film and television studies here at New York University. His latest book, Una mattina gloriosa, a glorious morning, has just been published in Italy, and it's the last one of his decalogue of 10 novels about New York in 10 different decades. And without further ado, please welcome Antonio Monda and Olivier Guez.
Buonasera. Good evening. Buonasera, Olivier.
Good evening.
English. You're a journalist and a novelist. Is there any major difference in the approach you have when you write as a journalist and as a novelist?
Well, good evening, everybody. I used to be a journalist, and I used to be a kind of a weird journalist in the sense that I was not at all attracted by the news, but what was behind the news. I give you an example. When, long time ago, I used to follow the OPEC summits, you know, the oil stuff. And I remember one big gathering of oil ministers in Algiers. And all the journalists were, of course, eager to know what would be, you know, the new quotas and all of this. And I didn't care at all about these quotas. What I was interested by was, for example, the relationship between the journalists and the ministers of oil. I had a friend who was working for l'AFP, Agence France Presse, and of course she had to be really, she had to follow. And she would tell me that she would have a jogging with a Saudi oil minister. I was fascinated by that kind of story. And I use also something, I shouldn't say this in America when they check all sources, but I use also to invent a few stories, for instance. But nothing too bad. So I decided to quit journalism and to become a writer. I think it's better for everyone.
That's the difference between us, because I don't like the news. I'm not interested in the news, and I'm not interested in what is behind the news as well. But the similarity...
So you're not interested at all, in fact.
No. But the similarity is that I invent a lot, I lie. Now, since we'll be watching a film which was presented in Cannes, and tell me something. Do you think that the language of images is somehow maiming, killing the language of the words, or not?
No, I think, as a writer being adapted, you shouldn't think that way, because otherwise you shouldn't sell your rights, and you keep the book and it remains a book. As long as you give the right or you sell the right to adapt, then you accept the game. And I mean, I trusted Kirill Serebrennikov, who was a great filmmaker, and I really love some of his films. For instance, Lito, I don't know if you saw it, The Summer in Russian, which is one of the greatest movies, I think, made the last 10 years. But I had no idea. I mean, we worked together for the script. He wrote the script, that I was there at every, step by step and as a consultant. But it's one thing to read a script, it's another thing to see it. So the first time I went to watch the movie, I was, of course, kind of anxious. But then, as a novelist, for that kind of book, I adapt the work of historians. I do accept that the filmmaker is going to adapt my own adaptation of the work of historians. So I don't think so much about the book. Of course, it has to have a kind of, to be somehow faithful to the book, but then it's another thing. And I'm very happy actually about how we transform it.
The book is The Disappearance of Josef Mengele, which is also the title of the film. Why you are so interested in a horrible human being and a criminal?
Good question. I asked this myself many times. And in fact, I bumped into Mengele, I wouldn't say by chance, but I moved to Berlin more than 20 years ago. I had a scholarship to write a book about the history of the Jews in Germany since the war. And basically it was also a story of the two Germanys. And the memories, how the relationship of the Germans to their past, to the Nazi time, evolved with time. And also from a West German perspective, East German perspective, then a reunified German perspective, and so on and so on. But that history was told from a victim perspective. And at the time, I wanted to write the same kind of story, but from a murderer perspective, but I didn't know which one. And in between, there is a German movie, which is the adaptation of one of the chapters of that book, and it's a movie about Fritz Bauer, who was a very famous judge, prosecutor in Western Germany in the 50s and the 60s. He's known for the Auschwitz trial in Frankfurt in the early 60s. And what was not known for a very long time is the one who discovered Eichmann in Argentina. And there was a deal with the Mossad. I give you Eichmann, but then you give me Eichmann back because I want to organize this trial in West Germany. And as we know, there was no trial in Germany, but in Jerusalem. Yeah. And so preparing the script with Lars Kraume, Der Staat gegen Fritz Bauer, I read a lot about Argentina, of course, and all these Nazi cycles in Argentina in the 50s. And of course, I bumped into Mengele. And then I thought, okay, I have my murderer. So I can tell the same story. It's always the same story, but seen through different... It's a bit like about Aldo Moro.
Marco Bellocchio.
Marco Bellocchio has done, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 times the same movie, but always from a different angle. Yeah. So I've done a bit my little Bellocchio. Yeah. It's always the same story, but always from a different perspective. So it's a trilogy about post-war Germany, post-war Europe, post-war South America.
To me, was surprising.
But also I have to say, there is another thing with Mengele. Mengele, as we know, is a criminal, is a murderer, and so on. What he did in Auschwitz was terrible. But for me, this is something I discovered as I was writing the book. Mengele, for me, is the symbol of the suicide of Europe in the first half of the 20th century.
Can you tell me why?
This is something very important to me as a European. Mengele was a bourgeois.
He came from a wealthy family.
Wealthy family. He had 2 PhDs, one in medicine, one in anthropology. His wife had studied in Florence art history. He liked classical literature, classical music. So he was not a Nazi fanatic since the early 30s. He's a guy who understood, because he was ambitious, that at the end of the 30s, if he wanted to do something, he had to be part of the SS. and then part of the first the Nazi from the party of the Nazi party, and then to the SS. So that's the very idea of opportunism. And this guy who liked classical music, classical literature, classical everything, whose wife was also from a very good family, wealthy family, is the same guy who a few years later could send 400,000 people to the gas chambers. And for me, this trajectory is the trajectory of Europe in the first half of the 20th century. And I wanted to know. Well, it's not a book about Mengele. It's a book about the second life of Mengele. And we know that he was never sentenced. He was never...
not even arrested.
No, he died in Brazil in the late 70s. But I wanted to know if somehow he was punished or not. And what exactly had happened to him in South America. Why wasn't he caught? So that was so there were two perspectives when I studied the book. First, try to know the truth about what had happened to him, who helped him, why did he escape, what happened to Eichmann, for instance. And then, nearly kind of a metaphysical question, the idea of punishment, crime and punishment. Was there a punishment for Mengele or not?
I don't want to spoil the film, but one of the key elements is the relationship between Mengele and his son, Rolf. Because Rolf Mengele knows that his father is hidden in South America. And there is a moment where he visits him. And do you agree that's the most important and most touching somehow?
This is for Serebrennikov. It is a very important moment. It's a key moment also in the book. I didn't give the same importance to that meeting that he did, but I could understand. For me, there are two key moments maybe in the book. That's the encounter with Eichmann, which doesn't really appear in the movie, and the encounter with a son, which is a turning point in the book. But it comes relatively late in the book, because it's in the late 70s, and Mengele had already been in South America for nearly 30 years.
The book is an award-winning novel in France. Can you tell me about the reaction, a general reaction and also a German reaction to the book?
Well, there were two countries or three countries where I expected reactions. That was Germany, Argentina, and Israel.
Israel, yeah.
Yes. Germany, that was weird. In general, I had very good reviews of the book, but also I remember, the Zeit in Germany is this huge newspaper. They have the longest articles in the world in just one page. And one historian that I quoted, actually, who had written a great book about Eichmann in Argentina, destroyed me. I just read the first paragraph, and she destroyed me.
Why?
Because I was fictionalizing the life of Mengele, especially because there are a few sex scenes in the book. A few. No, it's not every 3 pages that there is Mengele is having sex, but there are a few. And for her, that was not. She couldn't accept this. But so that was already the first paragraph. That was enough. Then I had a very long book tour in Germany. For instance, when I went to Freiburg, which is very close to Strasbourg, where I was born, so western part of Germany, where the son of Mengele, Rolf, was educated.
Is he still alive, by the way?
He was. I don't know, but he
was at the time.
He moved to Munich. Mm-hmm. He was a lawyer, and he changed his name. He took the name of his mother, but I didn't try to contact him. But in Freiburg, a few people came to me and told me, well, I was at school with Rolf Mengele. That kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. Or Günzburg, so the Mengele Stadt, the city of the Mengeles. I didn't want to go there. And but I had a lecture in Ulm. Ulm is 40 kilometers far from Günzburg. So a delegation of Günzburg came to Ulm, and they said, you have to come to Günzburg, you have to present the book in Günzburg. I said, I don't know, maybe. Okay, I said yes. But Günzburg was the only city where I didn't sleep. And it was the only city where I asked my Pressefrau, as you say in Germany, so my press agent, exactly, to come with me. I didn't want to go on my own in Günzburg. And so in a few cities, people would know some of the Mengele. So that was Germany. But I could see that time had passed by, had gone, and no big reaction. Same stuff in Argentina. Because, I mean, what I write about Perón is not the most positive thing about Peronism. And the Peronist movement is still very strong in Argentina, of course. And I remember I had an interview with a journalist of Página 12, which is the main Peronist newspaper in Argentina. And he nearly told me, I'm sorry for what happened, what Perón did. So also, there was no contest of this. And in Israel, well, they had other things in their mind, and I was a bit disappointed by the reaction in Israel. But it's
what do you mean? Controversial, negative?
No, there was no controversy at all. In the sense that, I mean, what is interesting that the Mossad did everything to catch Eichmann, and they did it. They were very, very close to get Mengele, and at a certain point they give up because they have other priorities. That's the early 60s, because the 67 war is being prepared, and Nasser is threatening Israel. So Mossad was very small at the time, so they had to take all their resources to the Middle East and to forget the criminals in South America.
I have still two questions. What do you think moved Mengele? Just opportunism, ambition? What was the force behind Mengele?
I think
to commit such horrendous crimes.
I think Mengele is maybe one of the best examples of this banality of evil, much more than Eichmann, because Eichmann was the head of the whole organization. So not banality; he's one of the general of the evil. Mengele, it's opportunism. He considers himself as a soldier of German biology. People forget that the Nazi system was based on biology. So basically, doctors had a huge, huge importance in the system. This is something which is forgotten, but that's the base. I mean, it's a racist ideology based on biology. So a young doctor, a young biologist, an ambitious young doctor had some amazing opportunities at the time. Then, when he goes, I mean, the war is over, and then he goes back to the mediocrity of his life before, of a bourgeois who had to leave his city, his country, and who tries to enjoy life as much as he can. But there is no regret. I mean, I worked. Mengele kept a diary for 20 years. This diary disappeared 10 years ago. It was bought anonymously to an anonymous seller. But there is a very good biography which was written by two New Yorkie lawyers. And they quote for pages the diary of Mengele. And there is not a single regret. There is no distance to anything. And his main motivation, in fact, was, like many people, to impress his father, to be better, or to have at least a better career than these Americans of mechanical staff. But I wouldn't say it was pure ideology. He's a good example of what happened in Europe. I mean, how authoritarian, how totalitarian regime works. They work because of these kind of people. And I want to tell the story of that kind of people, how far such a person can go within a regime which protects and encourages these kind of people to do what we consider as evil.
This is a story of a crime or horrendous crimes without punishment. How do you feel about that? This man survives for 30 years or so, and he dies alone, but with no punishment.
I think he got punished. Or maybe that's the story I told myself. But I think he got punished. I think he got punished because, again, he's a bourgeois. He was eager to have this kind of mediocre, rich life in Western Germany. And I mean, the 10 first years in Argentina, in the book there are two parts. The first one is the Pasha, that's the years in Argentina. His life is so nice and so easy that at the end of the 50s, he goes to the German embassy, he says, well, I lied when I arrived in Argentina. My name is not Gregor, I'm Josef Mengele. So he gets back his identity. And then you have the Rat. That's the last 20 years, after the capture of Eichmann. And for me, this is the punishment. Because this guy, Josef Mengele, lived in full paranoia. He was lonely, he was paranoiac. He spent nearly 15 years with a family of Hungarians that you're going to watch in the movie. That's at the end of the world. Completely lonely, and with the feeling that is paying for the crimes of all the doctors, of all the Nazi regime somehow. And this for me is a kind of punishment in the sense that what had happened if Mengele had been caught in Germany? Not by the Israelis, he would have died like Eichmann, but by the Germans. His family was very rich, so he would have had great lawyers to defend himself. Then he could have presented himself as a soldier. And he was a kind of a soldier. He was just a captain. He was not the head of the doctors in Auschwitz. He was one of the doctors in Auschwitz. So basically he would have said, well, I just respected the orders. So this guy would have spent, I don't know, maybe 5 years in custody, and then he would have been left. He could have studied another life. There is a good example. I was in Poland a few weeks ago, and I went to Belzec, which is also the end of the world. And in the museum in Belzec, there is a short extract of Shoah, the movie by Lanzmann. And no one was condemned in Belzec. In Belzec, they killed 500,000 people in 10 months. And then they destroyed everything. That was the first death factory in the history of the world. No one was condemned except one guy. And Lanzmann found the guy. He was working in a brasserie in Munich. And this guy was condemned to 4 years because there was no proof. There was no one left, in fact. So Mengele would have had this kind of, I think, of punishment in Germany. But on the other hand, what happened to him, because he was in Brazil, so he spent something like 10, 15 years with the Hungarian family, and then he went to a favela in the late 70s. This is where he dies, more or less. And this rich guy was forgotten, was getting paranoid because in the 70s, Mengele became a kind of a pop figure.
Yes,
like a villain, like, a James Bond villain.
There are films, The Boys from Brazil.
The Boys from Brazil, but also Marathon Man.
The
yes. Idea of the Nazi criminal is based on this fantasy of Josef Mengele, but there were some novels, and there were the books of Simon Wiesenthal. Wiesenthal had written that Mengele lived in Paraguay, that he had a huge Mercedes, that he had a huge hacienda, that he was surrounded by beautiful women. Then when he used to go to bars, he would put his pistol on the bar, surrounded by this beautiful woman. So really this kind of 60s
James Bond
imagination.
Yeah, evil.
So Mengele was reading that kind of stuff about himself when he was in this favela on his own, trying to get married with his with the lady who was cleaning his house. And so I mean, as a novelist, this stuff is amazing. I mean, as an historian, you can't play too much with this kind of thing. But as a novelist, it's a fantastic stuff. It's a kind of revenge, I would say. So for me, it was a kind of a punishment.
Thank you. I think that if you have questions, otherwise we will. Yes, please.
Yes. At the beginning, you mentioned a book that you said is one of the best books of the past decade. Would you repeat the title, please?
It's interesting. I forgot. Maybe I was speaking about one of my books. No, I'm joking. No. I know.
The film by Kirill Serebrennikov.
Yes, Leto. Leto. That's the Russian name.
Little, like small. Little.
Leto. Yeah. Yeah. Kirill Serebrennikov.
Same director of Tonight Film. Thank you.
Who directed. That's why I mentioned the movie.
There's a gentleman over there.
Yes. Why was South America such a hotbed, a place for all these Nazis to migrate to?
Well, I don't. Have you been to South America?
I lived in Brazil under the dictatorship in the early 70s, so I get it. And we're releasing a book called Operation Condor about that. So I know the story, but I don't. I'd like to hear from you.
I mean, in the South America, a bit like America, but especially South America, is a place when you start from afresh, basically. I mean, the past doesn't exist. You reinvent yourself. Argentina was a very special case because Argentina under Perón had a kind of fascination for fascism. Not Nazism, but especially fascism. He was in Italy, spent lots of time. He was fascinated by the Mussolini regime before the war. And so his ideology, which is a mixture of more or less all ideologies, was very... I mean, so there was a direct connection with fascism. But Perón was especially ambitious. And his idea was, in fact, that basically Argentina didn't have the time to form, a new generation of scientists, doctors, and so on. So his idea, like the Americans or the English, also the French or the Russians, was, well, let's get all these Germans. They have a fantastic formation, they have experience, so let's welcome them. And so there was a kind of compatible ideology, plus this possibility, in fact, of integrate themselves into the Peronist system. So, for instance, when I prepared the book, I went to Patagonia, to a city called Bariloche. And Bariloche is famous because it was a kind of a nuclear center. Perón wanted to build a kind of a nuclear, like many countries that we know today.
In the early 90s, Pripke was arrested there.
Yeah. Exactly. Pripke, at the time, had a delicatessen. So Pripke, for the one who don't know, is responsible for the worst massacres in Italy at the end of the war. And so he also moved to Argentina, to Patagonia, and so he had this delicatessen. So basically, you had a compatible ideology, you have the possibility, in fact, to integrate themselves and to integrate yourself. And what was very important also, that Argentina was extremely ambitious. Perón understood that, we were very close to a nuclear war between the US and the Soviet Union, as you know. And he thought, and he was right, that if there is this kind of nuclear war, basically one of the only zones where it's not going to be affected by this nuclear war would be the end of South America, which is Argentina or Brazil. So he thought, well, the new great power could be Argentina if the Soviet Union and America destroy themselves. So Argentina had to prepare itself to become the new superpower. We all know that it happened, but it could have happened.
And it's
so that was the idea.
It's quite shocking. You can check on YouTube because Pripke was recognized by an Italian TV journalist, and he said, "Are you Mr. Pripke?" And he proudly said, "Yes, I am." And then he was arrested. Yeah, please.
I'm going to try to ask this question well. I'm not sure I will. But, when you were in Germany, on your extended tour. Was there any sense among Germans that there was some kind of larger morality tale kind of embedded in this, that, you know, the lack of shame or guilt might somehow not just be a Nazi thing, but maybe some kind of latent German thing?
We have 3 hours. Just to start this conversation about the idea of guilt in Germany. To kind of make it short, I mean, the relationship, and this is something which is very fascinating, is how the relationship to the past evolved with time. I mean, basically the 50s and also the early 60s, everybody forgot. Everybody tried to forget. But also the victims, they didn't want to speak about this. Everybody was, in fact, looking forward to something new. So the past didn't exist. And that was the politics of Adenauer, for instance. Let's not forget, but let's not talk about the past. Let's create something new. But this is also what happened in France with de Gaulle. This is also what happened in Italy. This is what happened in Austria until nearly the beginning of this century. The idea that, okay, we have a kind of national union, because otherwise we're going to keep on killing ourselves and there will be a kind of civil war and so on. So this is what happened till the 60s. But then there was the Eichmann process, and then the Auschwitz process in Frankfurt, organized by Fritz Bauer. And then came this new generation. And then it started completely anew. I mean, you had this new generation who asked the fathers, the uncles, what did you do? Where did you do? Where were you? Why? And so on and so on. That's the story of the son of Mengele with Mengele, even if the son of Mengele is very ambiguous. So you have a whole generation of Germans who came to age in the 70s, in the 80s, who couldn't stand being German, who couldn't stand just speaking German, who left Germany, for instance. I have a very good friend in France. She was born in 1968, and just the idea of being German is complicated. So the evolution of the relationship with the past is something which is fascinating, but which is very European. And then what happened in Germany is also fascinating at the end of the 70s. Some might remember there was this Holocaust series with Meryl Streep. This changed everything. In America also, they discovered the Holocaust somehow. I mean, there were historians, but this became a mass phenomenon. And in Germany, it changed everything. Because it was not abstract. It became something which was, how to say, incarnated by a family. You had a good German family, Berliner family, which got completely killed, massacred, which disappeared. And then there was a huge shock in Germany. And this is when this kind of public memory started. But it didn't start because of the Holocaust theory, of course. It started like in any European country when all the people who were part of the system, within the system, not far from the system, went into pension. So basically the structures of the state wouldn't be affected. Because in a country like Germany, in the late 40s, 50s, I mean, if you had to think about the judges, if you had to think about the professors, if you had to think about the doctors, basically half or 3/4 of the society would have been dismissed. But then the state would have collapsed. And that was impossible. That was impossible also because of the Cold War. I mean, the West, America, needed a strong Western Germany, as the Russians needed a strong Eastern Germany. So basically, most of people who were part of the system kept on working. And this is why Mengele got so crazy in South America, because he knew that. He was stuck in South America, but he knew that most of his colleagues went back to university and died in their bed. He was one of the only ones who had to sleep with this Hungarian farmer. You're going to watch this. And he was mad about this. So we're going back to this idea of the punishment.
I have a quick question. In the choice of your villain, the fact also that in our collective imagination, probably Mengele, we put it in some place worse than Eichmann. And we know that Eichmann was the brain of the final solution and of the extermination of all Jews. Does it have to do with the fact that Mengele had a direct personal relationship with his victims, at least how we can imagine him, the relationship a doctor would have, so he would touch them, see them on a daily basis? Is that something that adds to the horror that his person emanates, and especially for you? And then minor observation, when you said that at a certain point the Mossad stopped looking for the Nazi criminals in the 70s, does that have to do with the fact that they were busy catching, for example, all the perpetrators of the massacre of the Olympics? So the attention was moved from a sort of historical, poetic justice to a much more concrete and needed contemporary justice.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for the second point, I mean, the Mossad is not the secret service of the memory of the Jews. It's the secret service of the State of Israel. And at a certain point, the two priorities, I mean, these were two different options, two different priorities. And the main priority was the security or the revenge against the perpetrators of Munich, for instance. I mean, to go back to your first question, I would say that Eichmann was a white-collar criminal. He was organizing, but he didn't kill himself. He didn't kill anyone directly. Mengele was a blue-collar criminal. He killed, he tortured directly. He decided on the ramps in Auschwitz who would die and who would live maybe 2 more days or 6 more weeks or whatever. So it's a big difference. But what is interesting, I mean, the relationship between Eichmann and Mengele is fascinating. Because before the war, Mengele was the white collar and Eichmann was the blue collar. He came from very, I don't know, small background, didn't study anything. Then, during the war, it's the opposite. Eichmann was one of the head of knew all the heads of the regime and was the organizer. And after the war in Argentina, both of them go back to their initial position. Mengele goes back to this white-collar world. He has money from the family, he does business in South America. And Eichmann goes back to this blue-collar world. Everything he does fails. And they hated each other. That was a social class conflict, classical social conflict. For Mengele, Eichmann was a has-been. For Eichmann, Mengele was nothing. He was nothing, he was just a little doctor in Auschwitz. So the conflict, that could have been another movie. That's the movie you're not going to watch tonight.
Thank you for giving us another movie, just with what you just said. Thank you.
There is a final question. Can you take the gentleman over there? 1 second.
I found intriguing that you mentioned that you described Mengele as an opportunist, right? To what extent, in an almost cynical way, do you see that his story could play or help us interpret the current U.S. administration?
This time we have a 5 hours question. It's not a 3 hours question, it's a 5 hours question. Or not. Okay, let's say not. So that's the short answer.
If I may add very briefly, I don't know if you're familiar with the Operation Clipboard. I'm sure Olivier knows. At the end of the war, this country basically hired top German scientists, a member of the Nazi Party, and to build the atomic bomb. One of them was Werner von Braun, who was a genial scientist but also a criminal. But he was hired by the Americans to build the atomic bomb. A very different fate if you compare him to Eichmann, Mengele, and all the others. That's history. Tragic history, but it's time to go. So enjoy the film. I want to thank Olivier.
Thank you, Antonio.
Professor
Thank you, everybody.